lot of them will be like, yeah, but I don't want to say the same stuff. And I'm like, listen, everybody says it one way or another. It's the listener that finds the right one that speaks their language. So
100%.
yeah.
Some things will click with some people one way and click with other people another way. So yeah, hopefully this is helpful.
Exactly. Oh, I'm sure it will be. If for anybody, it'll be helpful for me. So.
Nice.
Let's see. Let me get this. I'm gonna mute this for just a second. All right. Sorry about that. Let's see.
Good.
And it's loading. And it looks like we are. Where's it at? Where's it at? Live for another awesome episode of 5 Methods to Be a Better Fighter. I am your host, Attilius Primus Castus from the Kingdom of Artemisia. I'm a dirty mercenary from the household of Black Company. I know a lot of people don't know that, so I wanted to point it out that I am a tried and true dirty merc. I'm not squired to anybody, and so on and so forth. So anyway, tonight we have Jarl. I'm going to completely destroy this. I should have asked you before the video started. Niall.
Yeah, so a lot of people say Jarl Niall because it makes them laugh because that rhymes. I go with Neil or Niall. It really doesn't bother me.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Well, you heard it from him.
Yeah.
He's from Australia, obviously. Don't get that confused with New Zealand. They have kind of a competition between the two of them about who has more kings. It's Australia, by the way. So anyway, without further ado, I'm just going to turn it over to him, and he's going to talk to us about his 5 methods on how to be a better fighter.
Yeah, hi. So thanks everyone for tuning in. It is 10:30 a.m. here in Canberra, Australia. So I've booked out some work calendar time to have a chat to all y'all, and really appreciate you having someone from the Kingdom of Lockhart on. I am Jarl Niall. I am a Duke here from the Kingdom of Lockhart. I've reigned 3 times. My first time I was an unbelted king and had the privilege to go to Pennsic and was the only unbelted king at Pennsic that year. So that was a brilliant experience. And I've reigned 2 more times, most recently stepping down in January this year before their current majesties got to deal with the global pandemic that we have. So I've timed that well to get out of that one. I originally joined the SCA in 2001 and stayed in for about a year while I was at university, but various things precluded me from continuing my SCA time then, and I dropped out. but then I subsequently came back in 2008. So I'd say that I've been an active player since 2008 and was really training as a fighter since 2008. I won crown as an unbelt in 2013 and was subsequently offered elevation on my step down from that reign, and was knighted in 2014, backed up to reign again in 2014, and then most recently reigned with a good friend of mine, which has been great. I've had the experience to go to Pennsic twice and learn a lot from everyone there, and experience the culture of different kingdoms over there. And then last year, I also had the opportunity to go to Raglan Fair in the Kingdom of Drachenwald in Wales, and experience Drachenwald culture and fighting culture there, which was also great. So I'm going to talk about my 5 things today, and as I was just saying before we went live on Facebook, I'm seeing a lot of commonality between what we're all talking about, the upper end fighters, about what our methods are. They all seem to overlap with each other, and the heart concepts appear to be the same, but we're all using different words, I guess, to explain them. So hopefully the way I explain my thoughts on this will click and resonate with some of you, and some of the other trainers that have been speaking, their words might resonate better with you, or it might be a combination of ours. But it seems at the heart of it, our concepts are sort of the same. So I'll give you my list of 5, and then I'll go back and talk through them, as seems to be the common way to do these things. So number 1 that I want to talk about is conditioning. Number 2 I want to talk about is footwork. Number 3 I want to talk about is measure. Number 4 I want to talk about is opponent appreciation. And number 5 I want to talk about is warrior mentality. To just ascending list of topics as to what I think are most important as you progress to be a better fighter. So, yep. So I'll start with number 1, which is conditioning. And I know, Attilius, this will make you happy, because topic number 1 under conditioning is fitness. But it's not just fitness, it's health as well. So, a number of trainers have already sort of said it. If you don't prepare your body for this combat sport, you're not going to get better. If you don't prepare your body, you're likely to do yourself an injury or multiple injuries. And injuries are already common in this sport, even if you do have a prepared body. So if you're really not conditioning your body to stand up to the rigors of the upper end of this game, you're not going to advance as a fighter, and you're going to do yourself an injury, and that's going to keep you down. So I mean, it's not just cardio fitness; it's strength, it's range of motion, it's joint stability. That's something I have to focus on a lot, is joint stability. I'm a big guy. I did the conversions earlier to put it in imperial for you guys. I'm about 6'2.5" and 265 pounds. And I'm 37 years old, and after 20 years of also playing basketball, my knees don't appreciate when I do certain things dynamically or rapidly if I haven't warmed up and I haven't kept my knees strong over the winter. So I think conditioning is really quite important. Yeah, I mean, I also come off the fact that I have a permanent shoulder disability in both shoulders from my military service. So I have chronic shoulder instability, and I just have to maintain strength and conditioning in those joints to be able to do what I do. So I think I think preparing your body is particularly important, and of course cardio, because if you're going to gas out in 15, 20 seconds, you're going to have trouble getting through, any kind of major tournament list. Our biggest tournament that we have here in Lockhart is our fighter auction tournament that we have at festival each year, and we can have anywhere between 70 and 120 fighters in that. That's pretty much our biggest list. And if you're going to get through that, and it's going to take half a day, you're going to need some good cardio. But in addition to cardio and conditioning your joints and your body to get through that, you need endurance. And endurance, a lot of people think of endurance as to how long they can get through the fight or how many fights they can get through. But I think about it as how quickly you can recover between fights. And I think that's where your endurance sort of comes in. So you can go out and do a fight, come off, get your water, you've got your air, you can go again. I think where you really notice that is not so much in tournaments, but in training. That's how many people can come off after those 15 passes where your training partner's gone, yep, I'm done now, and you come off and you take your helmet off and you're not particularly breathing very hard, but your training partner on the day is breathing hard. So I guess that's some broad thoughts about conditioning.
Sure.
The other part of conditioning that I wanted to cover off on is drills, because a lot of people are talking about drills, and there's a lot of videos out right now about Pell drills and various drills you can do at home. I think that is part of conditioning, because it's an ingrained reaction that your body will do when you put under stress. I think about it from a military or a law enforcement perspective, which is my experience, which is when you're under a stressful situation, you need to be able to react to the problem that exists in front of you. And the solution for that is a drill that you have done 1,000 times and learnt, so that you can just react with that rather than having to think about it on the move. And I think that sort of falls into conditioning as well. And it's not going on the internet and finding Super McDuke's drill of the week and doing a drill of the week. It's about having 3 or 4 drills that you do all the time for multiple years. So it's training properly rather than it's quality over quantity when it comes to drills, so that you're doing and perfecting the drills that you do choose, rather than learning a lot of drills and doing them poorly.
So would you say doing these drills at the Pell, or are you an advocate for the Pell, or do you think doing it over and over again with a moving opponent would be?
Yeah. So my answer to that's going to vary, which is going to be annoying for you. I think so I'm an advocate of the Pell, depending at where you're at in your fighting career, depending on where you're at with your drills. Where I'm at right now, I don't go to the Pell very often. The time I go to the Pell is if I've been forced to take a break for whatever reason, or I'm preparing for a major tournament or something like that. Then in the weeks leading up to it, I will go to the Pell. And the specific reason that I go to the Pell is I want to change my targeting margin of error from half a foot to an inch, sort of thing. I just want to tighten up what I'm doing, and that's what I use a Pell for now. Okay. As an unbelt fighter, I did a lot of work at the Pell, but it was to get those shots tight. I wanted to learn over time that I didn't want to just hit somebody in the arm. I wanted to hit them exactly 1 inch above the elbow. When I was doing it, so that if my eyes could see the target, my hand and my arm could hit the target. So I'm a proponent of the Pell in that way. I'm also a proponent of interpersonal drills. But I think you have to be careful of how you do drills with people, because sometimes both parties aren't getting something out of it. And if you're okay in that training space, that one person, is just receiving as a trainer, and they're working on something with the other person, that's fine. But I actually find that interpersonal drills can be limiting and a bit boring, and I think they can train some bad habits as well as some good habits, because you're putting yourself in a slow simulated combat sport position, and you're not reacting the way you would, when you are actually fighting. And that's something I'll talk about in point 5 when I talk about warrior mentality as well, is that sort of concept. But caveating all of that, I guess, if you live in, backwater McNowhere, then you're going to need to worship at the Pell and do your Pell work and use your videos. If you live in one of the super baronies that has, 50 nights available at your local practice, then your in-person training is probably going to be more helpful.
Makes
I
sense.
guess it's not a very clear answer, but it depends, I guess.
No, I agree with you. Like when you're working on aiming at the Pell, I mean, you aim small, miss small, right? So I use that because a lot of times you're looking at like a 1.5 inch gap between somebody's shield, their helmet, and their stick, depending on where the positioning is. And if you can't hit that, then you need to go at the Pell. So
that's right. Yeah, you want to be able to get that 1.25 inches through that 1.5 inches. That's the name of the game sometimes, and you want to be able to do it without thinking,
right.
And just let your hand do it. So
perfect, love it. I thought it was a good answer. So
good. Shall I move on to number 2?
Yep. Whenever you're ready, buddy.
Okay. So cool. So number 2 is footwork. Now, when I say footwork, footwork is something that most people come to later in their SCA fighting learning journey, because you turn up at your first fighter practice or your first couple of fighter practices, and somebody takes you over to a Pell and they put a stick in your hand and they show you a snap and they show you an offside, and then 2 months in, let's get advanced and we're going to show you how to throw a wrap, and we'll work on throwing a wrap, and then make yourself a Pell and go home and learn how to throw these shots. Okay, great. And then you're starting to do better, and then people are like, well, you need to do footwork. And then you go, how? Well, you need to step. Okay. How? Oh, you need to be step offline. Okay. But what we're not very good at is, I guess, teaching how you step and how you move offline. How your feet are positioned. So what you end up with is a bunch of people who think that they would step offline the same way they would avoid someone coming out of an elevator door towards them, or they're going to step through someone the way they would just walk down their hallway in their house. And what you end up with is this quorum of fighters who think that footwork is walking, or think that, some people are helpful and they say, take up dancing to improve your footwork. And yeah, okay, it's an interesting theory, but I don't dance because I'm not a fan. But I don't think it's what we're trying to achieve. What I think you need to learn in your path to becoming a better fighter, and in relation to footwork, is to learn how to move tactically, and that is to learn how to move purposefully, dynamic, in a situation where you're about to have a fight of some description. The way I like to teach that is it starts from stance, and you get people to to take their fighting stance and you know, have a look at it and have a chat to them, and then I say, all right, okay, now we're at a pub, and I'm about to start a pub fight with you, and I'll give the person a shove on their chest, and then I'll watch them square up. And when they square up, ready to fight me, I'm like, well, why didn't you stand like that when I said we were going to fight? Oh, well, you know, someone told me once that, you know, it's different, right? But why is it different? Like, I'm going to hit you, or I'm going to hit you. So, yeah, you know, human beings are conditioned in this way to react to a threat of violence, and to fight, and people square up to have a fight. I tell my squires part of their homework for their footwork is to go watch UFC, MMA, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. And then I say, what I want you to do is not watch what's happening in the fight. I want you to watch what their feet are doing in the fight. And I want you to watch how they start the fight and walk across the octagon to each other, where it's those short steps, very purposeful, weight distributed for the most part on their balls of their feet rather than their heels, and they're in a position that at any point in time they can throw a punch, throw a kick, do a takedown, or not fall over. And I think that's sort of key to the footwork process, is that you address an SCA fight like you would a pub fight, a boxing match, a UFC match, because all these other combat sports have these very specific ways of moving on their feet. So it's true when people say, well, you need to step offline when you throw that shot. But what they don't say to you is that you need to step offline with the weight on the balls of both of your feet in a short step where you've got a leading foot and a trailing foot, so that your feet stay square underneath your frame, so that if you're halfway through stepping offline and old mate changes his shot from an onside to an offside and you need to go the other way, you're still in a position that you can go the other way, because you haven't just gone clomp and walked one way and fully committed to a bad decision, because nobody's actually taught you how to step in the fight. No one's taught you how to do footwork like a fighter, like a boxer, like a martial artist. People have just said to you, well, you need to step offline. So you've stepped offline like you would in the coffee line at the cafe to let somebody go past you. And that's not a tactical movement in footwork.
Makes sense. Thank you for breaking that down, because that is one thing in my particular fighting career that I've been struggling with, trying to understand, because you take that, everybody has that center line, right? And a lot of times when they say, okay, well, if you're going to throw this way, you should step this way off that center, so you create angles. And that's, I wouldn't say that's necessarily wrong, but you practice that on a pel and it doesn't move. What happens when you fight an opponent that moves with you and you're still on center? You're still on center as you step, we'll say, to the right, and they step the same way. You're still in the same position. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
so
I
do
know what you mean.
So I think taking it to the next step of actually studying martial arts and, like you said, UFC, I think that would be fundamental for me, and it's probably something I should do more of.
Yeah, and there's a number of ways that I trained myself in an SCA context to be able to do this, because as I said before, military and law enforcement background, I know how to do this in other ways, and bringing those concepts to SCA fighting has been very helpful for me. But to train it in an SCA context, I had to do two things very specifically, which might be helpful for some people out there. So I'll just go through them. One of the things I did was to teach myself to get my weight on the balls of my feet. And I used to say my weight on my toes, but that's not what I mean. I mean the balls of my feet, the fleshy bit behind my toes. to do that, when I would go to training, and I did this for the better part of half a year, I made a pact with myself that as soon as I put my helmet on, I would move up onto the balls of my feet, kind of like I was walking on a timber floor with no shoes on that you do at home to kind of be quiet. You know, that real tiptoe kind of creeping about kind of motion. So when I was at training, as soon as the helmet went on, my weight went up on my balls of my feet to train myself to make sure that I didn't forget in a fight when my helmet was on. It was just associating putting my helmet on with that purposeful movement. That was one thing I did. Okay. The other thing I did was I moved my pel to the dustiest, most bare part of my backyard that had no grass. And then what I would do is I would not have a sword in my hand, and I would shut my eyes, and I would go through the motion of, there's a drill called the perfect circle. Some of you might be aware of it. And I would go through the perfect circle drill with my eyes closed, then step back and then look at my markings in the dirt. And it was just to see where my feet were going as I was making these theoretical moves, to know whether I was stepping purposefully or not, and to whether that I guess arc as I was doing it stayed tight. And I knew if it was staying tight, that I was stepping pretty much purposefully in how I was doing it. So that's kind of two ways I learned how to do it. And I think it's really important to train yourself specifically how to do it. It's not necessarily innate. For some people, it's sort of innate. You'll understand what I'm talking about when I'm talking about it. But that doesn't mean it comes naturally, and it requires some training. And, you know, the same thing of any skill. If I said to you, use the coffee machine to make a coffee, you'd say how. You know, if I said to you, now you shoot the gun, you'd say how. But when people say you need to step offline, people go, okay, and they try and step offline because, you know, they've been walking as long as your little one there has been walking in their life. People have been walking since they were, 18 months old, and so they think they know how to walk in step, but they really don't unless they train it specifically.
Sure. Okay. Got it.
Cool.
So helmet comes on, toes up.
Helmet comes on.
Or heels up.
Heels up. Get on the balls of your feet.
Yeah.
And I think we were talking a few weeks ago and watching some of your fighting. That would be something that you could really that would like really step up your fighting. It's one of those things that as soon as you do it, it steps you up like 15% in capability, because more often than not, your opponent's not training that and not doing that, and it's when you've got plenty of other things in your package that you can work on that just has this sudden rapid improvement, because your ability to get from point A to point B is tactical and effective.
Okay, perfect.
Cool. All right, number 3, I'll talk about, I'm going to use the word measure. Some people will use range, whatever you want to call it. It's about distance and time. Now, myself as a fighter, I like to think that I have a very, very, very good control of measure. Some of my opponents in lockup will tell you that I frustrate them immensely because I get them to throw air swings that just brush my white belt as it goes past. And that makes me really happy, because I know that I'm on the exact edge of their measure. And once you overswing, I can jump on you because you're now out of position. The concept about measure that I want to talk about is the concept of distance equals time equals options. That is something that I've also taken from my mundane career, but in my mundane career, that's about creating distance and getting away from someone to be able to give you an option to deal with the situation. But in the SCA, it works both ways. Leaving a fight is a very effective way of not getting hit. So I'm a fighter that is ready to leave at a moment's notice because I don't know what's happening, or I don't like what's happening, or I'm not ready for what's happening. And so my default is to step out. My default isn't to throw a bunch of shots and and turtle up and just deal with it, I'm leaving, and I will run backwards. People will tell you that you shouldn't run backwards, you should step off line. Well, that depends on how fast you can run backwards, I think. And, you know, I'm a big guy, but, you know, I try and run backwards pretty fast and try and step off line at the same time, and then try and peek to see if you're still following me. But why controlling that range is important is because if I'm backing out and I'm purposely backing out, I'm still controlling what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not leaving in a panic. I'm purposefully increasing the range to see what happens. Now, if you are interested in following me as I back out, well, then I hope you're doing that purposefully, because if you're just instinctively chasing me down and throwing shots, well, then by the time the third shot comes in, you're probably out of control and I'm still in control. And if we go back to my footwork point, my feet are ready and I'm in a position now that I can now exploit the fact that you've thrown 3 shots as I've been leaving. You've only hit the front edge of my shield. You've never been in range to hit my body. And now I am in a position to hit you back because I was ready and waiting, because I controlled that range as I left, and then the timing to throw my shot back. So that's stepping out. The same thing with moving forward or going in. You'll see a lot of people who can step in and can take range, and then they get there and they don't do anything. And that's the worst place you can be, is if you want to step in real close and then you freeze up and you don't do anything. So if I'm stepping in for a reason. And you know, when I fight, particularly on a kneeling opponent, you know, I'll step in and close the range and be right on top of them, and then I'll throw the thing that I was going to throw, and if it doesn't work, I'm leaving again until I'm out of their range, until I can readdress the threat, see what gaps are presenting, or I'm processing in my head what they did while I threw the shots at them, to come up with a new solution to try on my next purposeful attempt to close range with them. So I guess the point of my range and my measure conversation is it needs to be purposeful. You need to be deciding what you are going to do, and you need to control that distance and time between you and your opponent to your advantage, because if you control the distance and the time, you are controlling the fight.
Right.
And being in control the whole time is what will give you 95% of your victories. You know, every now and again, somebody will slip something through that you weren't expecting, or was, you know, just a lucky fluke or whatnot. But, you know, the overwhelming odds that any of us would take in any kind of bet says that if you control the range and the timing of the fight, you control the fight. And if you control the fight, then you win the fight. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about with range and distance. To learn that, however, you're going to get hit a lot, and it's going to hurt, because you need to over time, I guess, consider what you are doing purposefully, and you're going to make mistakes in that. You're not always going to be able to control the range or the distance, and you're going to come up against opponents, you know, who are very good at controlling that, and they won't let you. I always find it interesting when I go into a fight and someone is trying to control the measure and the range, and that's a fun fight for me, because now we've got a fight of intellect and intelligence, and it's really fascinating to be in that moment where we're both trying to control the fight without actually throwing anything. They're really exciting moments, you know. It's those moments you see two top end fighters get out there and one twitches and the other one's like, you got me, yeah, right, you know, I just saw what you were trying to do there, but nobody's actually thrown anything. They're the
should have thrown it. Should have thrown it, and you could have killed me, but you didn't.
That's right. Yeah.
Yep.
Nearly had me.
Yep. Yep, yep. And that's why, honestly, sometimes for a spectator, upper end fights between we'll say two super dukes is actually really boring to watch because they go in and they'll throw a little bit and then they'll take a step back and they'll do this
Yeah.
number and they'll look and then they'll go in and then you're like, "Ah, for God's sakes, just bang." But it's a very intellectual
And
fight.
it's funny,
So.
and they're having the most fun of their lives. Like, this is the same fun that they've had since they first picked up their sword, because now it's
Exactly.
really challenging. And you can almost hear the combat computers going in both people's heads as they're trying to calculate the threat and trying to predict what's going on and control the space and timing that they've got and make sure they're doing that. It's fantastic.
But to the untrained eye, they don't realize all that is going on. So it's like, what a drag. But it is cool to
Yeah.
watch. It is very cool to watch. For me, anyway.
Yeah, it's those quarter of an inch movements of 1 foot that are about to be the game changer as to whether somebody wins or not.
Yep, exactly. So my final thoughts on measure is if I can kill you and you can't kill me, I'm in the best position.
Exactly, right? Exactly. And as I said before, I'm a big guy and I've got a fairly long range, and that puts me at an advantage with that for the most part. But that's not to say that I haven't been killed by 5'2" individuals who've got right in close and they've controlled the range and the distance, and they've got right in my uncomfortable space, and I didn't like it. And I am not the tallest fighter in this kingdom. I am big, but for my household, I'm only the median height. I'm extra medium in size. If you look at the current king of Lockhart, His Majesty Theodoric, he is significantly taller than me and bigger than me generally, and I become the little fighter in that fight. So I have to try and fight like a little guy, which is a bit strange. So yeah.
All right. Biggest guy I've ever
Okay.
fought is 6'9". So
Yeah.
6'9"
Okay.
inches tall. So big old boy.
Big boy.
Yeah.
He'll be, if he's anything like me, when I fight a shorter fighter, he's going to be really uncomfortable with somebody being in this space here. This is my scary space, and I sort of don't want you anywhere below my chest and in my stomach kind of region where I can't see you
Right.
out of the bottom of my eye slot of my helmet. So
Gotcha.
get in there. It scares us and gives us butterflies in our stomach. And then if you're doing it to me, I'm going to purposefully leave because I'm not controlling this space anymore.
If I can't see you, I can't control where you're going. So fair
100%.
enough. Perfect.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So let me talk about number 4, which I've called opponent appreciation, or I'll also call it tactics or fight tactics. My little catchphrase in it is, if you find yourself in a fair fight, then your tactics suck. I want to employ a range of tactics that make this an unfair fight so that I win the fight. Now, how do we do that? Well, it depends on how much time you've got and how familiar you are with your opponent, hence opponent appreciation. Now, if I am fighting one of the other up-end fighters in my kingdom, if I know, let's say I know they're entering Crown and I'm also entering Crown, I'm going to YouTube and I'm finding every single fight that person has ever been filmed on YouTube, and I'm watching how they fight. Now, that will start off with what is their weapon system? What is their weapon and shield system that they're utilizing, and then I have in my head, what are the weaknesses of that system straight up. So, if you're a shorter fighter and you use a center grip round, then generally, and there's exceptions to everything, and certain people are better than other people. But if you're using a center grip round and you're shorter than me, then you're probably going to be vulnerable to some sort of sky wrap situation if I step in over the top of you, because you don't have a back edge of a shield to catch my sky wrap. You might be able to get sword block to it, and you might find other ways for me not being there. But that is a shot that will will sort of work. If you're a Florentine fighter, that opens up a bunch of strengths and weaknesses. If you're a glaive fighter, well, we know that the weakness is that I'm going to be on your toes, but I go away and I do my homework on my opponent to see what their style is, what their weakness is, where their stance and positioning is, what their opening shot is, because some people have like a go-to opening shot, and that's the opening shot that they throw to 90% of the time. And if you know that that's what's coming in and you've already got that blocked, well, that puts you in an advantage that you can try something else. Now, you don't always have that time to go and do your research and your homework to be able to generate tactics, but what you do have is the time to observe your opponent when they're walking on the field. You might be able to get some time during the tournament where you're watching them fight other people, but you can watch them walk onto the field. And the first thing you'll see is obviously what their weapon form is. And I have, I guess a range of combat solutions as to what my most common tactic will be against that weapon form that I see, or what I predict that weapon form will most likely produce to me as a threat. Obviously there's always exceptions, but you've got to go with your averages and your percentages if you've got no other time to deal with that. So after you sort of look at their weapon form, you can look at what their stance is, and what their foot position is, because you'll be able to tell straight away if that person's just clomped on the field and their footwork has been a bit non-tactical. So you can see how the movement's going to go in that fight, and that's fine while you're watching them walk on the field. The most important thing you can observe when you're on the field is whether they're left-handed.
Yeah. I got a funny story about this, but I'll tell it after you're done. Continue. No, continue.
Yeah, and so do I. So the funny story is day one of pickups at Penzic, the last Penzic I went to, I'm there, I'm already a Duke, and I go to fight this guy who's also a Duke. Aaron was his name, from up in the northeast there, somewhere in Canada, I think. And he comes out and he was just kicking my ass. Like, he was hitting me in places and I couldn't work it out. And he had this center grip heater situation and a sword. And it was when we came off, I'm like, what is going on? Look, in my own defense, I was jet lagged. It's a long flight from Australia. Long flight to get from Australia and set up a campsite and then put your helmet on and go out and do pickups.
Yeah.
So I probably wasn't thinking the most clear at the time. And then I watched him fight someone else. So I'm like, he's left-handed. But when he walked out to me, he holds his center grip in front of him and he holds his sword behind it. You only see the top of his sword and you never actually see his hands. So he's actually really good at taking away that initial opponent appreciation that he's left-handed, because he doesn't tell you, and it's sort of hidden. So if you can observe that they're left-handed, obviously that will change what you're about to do. You'll see some people who I'll call bottom middle rank fighters, and sometimes you'll see them square up against the lefty and they haven't changed anything. And the fight will be over and they'll lose and they'll come off and I'll be like, he's left-handed, right? Oh yeah, okay. So why did you do the exact same thing you did with a right-handed fighter? That doesn't make sense to me. The threat is coming from the exact opposite side.
Yeah.
So that's some thoughts on opponent appreciation from that kind of level. And the other thing, I guess, sits with demeanor of the fighter, and that is, are they an aggressive fighter? Are they a passive fighter? Are they an energetic fighter? Are they a low energy fighter? And because you can create all your personal solutions to all of those problems, but these are things that you work out not only through trial and error doing them, but you have to watch those fighters and deeply think about what they're doing and what the strengths and weaknesses are to their fighting style or their weapon style or their left-handedness. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so the same similar thing happened to me. I mean, it wasn't like a Duke or anything like that. It was just the Outlands list or the Outlands prize list at Australia. It's a pretty big list here in the States. And Australia is probably, I'd say, top 5 biggest events that we have. And it was in the semifinals, and I was just fighting this guy. Didn't even realize he was left-handed, but I noticed he was coming off to the offside a lot. And I'm like, why is this guy, all this guy's throwing is offsides? And then finally I legged him and I took a few steps back and I realized it was like, oh my God, he's a lefty. So I think we all have similar stories like that. I mean, not, like I said, not predominantly 2 Dukes going at it and not realizing one's a lefty, but it's one of those things you got to be like, oh, right, he's left-handed.
And as soon as you realized that he was left-handed, you changed your whole approach to the fight.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because your combat computer went, right, yeah. It's a different thing. I need to do a different thing. You know, I need to bring my sword over. Otherwise, my right hand love handle is going to wear some bruises when they start throwing body snaps at that side of your body, and you know, all our nerve endings still work on that side of our body. So really
exactly. Yeah. That's why that bigger brand. That's why Chad's shots hurt so bad when he hits us on that side. He's a Florentine fighter, so.
Oh yeah, don't even talk to me about Florentine fighters. They're the bane of my existence.
Perfect. Alrighty.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So number 5, warrior mentality is what I have entitled this, and this is my most controversial thought set. You know, I recently put a video on YouTube where I spoke about it, and it did get me a lot of personal messages. Fortunately, in fascination and support of my ideas rather than criticism, but I was expecting criticism, but fortunately that didn't come. I guess the critics were quiet at the time. So what I want to talk about is the fact that we are doing a combat sport, the fact that we're having a fight in a controlled situation, but people aren't addressing it as such. So what I want to talk about is being comfortable with violence and being comfortable with a controlled use of force situation. Now, I break this down, it's probably oversimplistic, but I always say that there's kind of 2 main sets of knights, and those are the swordsmen and those are the warriors. I use various analogies to also explain that, but let's say that the swordsmen are Formula One race car drivers, and let's say the warriors are NASCAR drivers for a good reference for those of you in the US. Okay. Now to break this down, the swordsmen I find are about refinement of the art, refinement of drills, methods, and utilizing a weapon system, whatever it is, to finite perfection. This is something that our brothers in the Masters of Defense sort of do as well. You know, it's about that you know, refinement of skills and perfection of skills. The other type of person that I discuss is the person who is the warrior, and I like to think of myself as falling into that school. And that is, I don't care what the weapon system is. I don't care about the perfection of the drill or the art. I care that you die and I don't. So I care about having a fight. In my YouTube video that I put up, I referenced his current Majesty Theodoric, and something that he said years ago when we were talking about a certain fighter, about whether they were particularly good or whatever, and he said, "But would you want him next to you in a bar with a bar stool?" And I thought that was a really great analogy. The thing that he was trying to say is, can this person engage in our combat art and our combat sport, I should say, and perform regardless of what the weapon system is that they have in their hand, regardless of what the environment is? Do they have an innate quality to be a fighter? Now, there's overlap between both swordsmen and warriors, and it comes to your comfort level with violence. Now, I'm quite comfortable with violence due to exposure through various things that I've been exposed to in my life, and I have various drills and skill sets that I draw down on to adapt and perform in that situation. Some people think that they're not, because they've never had a fight outside of SCA. They've never been in a pub fight or fought with a sibling that got overly rough or whatever. But when I was talking about this concept recently, a fighter here in our kingdom that I respect quite greatly messaged me and said that he found it very fascinating, because he'd always thought himself as being, a lover, not a fighter, and being quite peace-loving and never getting involved in any kind of situation like that. But he said once he listened to what I was saying about being comfortable with violence, he realized that in several occasions during his life, when violence had erupted in front of him, he was the one who stepped in to try and break up the fight.
Yeah.
So two people were being aggressive, and he just stepped in and, no, that's enough, and break it up. And he realized that was his comfort level with violence. He wasn't engaging in the violence, but he was comfortable to do a thing while violence was happening around him. Now, SCA Combat is violent, particularly a war scenario. Particularly a Penzic type war scenario where there's literally 2,000 things happening in front of you at once. So in those situations, there's a lot of physiological and mental responses to that stress that you need to inoculate yourself against. Three that people will I guess kind of identify with is like target fixation. That is, you can only see the person in front of you that you're fighting, and that's it. And everything else is a blur. Now, that's okay, I guess, in a tournament, but in a war scenario, that's going to get you piked in the side of the head or flat snapped by the guy who's actually standing next to that guy. One of the other things you get is auditory exclusion, which means you're not hearing anything. It's all just a jumble. And that's going to be a problem in both the war field and the tournament field, because in a tournament field, you need to be aware of, holds and things of that nature. And in war, you need to hear what's going on around you to be able to adapt. And then the third one that I guess is the most troubling one is when people red mist. I don't know if that's a term that translates for you guys. Someone who gets into like a
when they see
very
red,
powerful rage. Yeah, see red.
Yep.
Get into a fixated rage. We sort of call that red misting. That is bad in SCA, right? Because
you're not in control.
You're not in control, and you're not in control of yourself, and you're doing yourself no honor, and you're doing your opponent no honor, and you've thrown out your cool, and you're likely to do something that breaks the rules, and you're not being a good fighter anyway, because you are out of control and you're red misting.
Right.
So to handle that, you need to learn how to inoculate yourself to these things, and you need to, I believe that's what a warrior does, because in the midst of the violence, in the midst of the confusion, the warrior, comes up with their solution to win the fight. Sorry, my phone just went funny there.
Yeah, you're good.
I've lost my train of thought there for a second. Yes, so inoculating yourself to that stress will help you develop this warrior mindset. Now, as you progress in your fighting career, people describe this in various ways, and that's what I was talking about when we were discussing at the beginning, that people explain things a little differently. You know, some people talk about how the fight slows down a lot for them, and they can see what's happening around them and what's coming. And, you know, because we're all nerds, we use matrix references and things like that. But, you know, that is you being comfortable in this combat scenario where you're able to respond because you're not in a panic about what's going on. You're not red misting. You're not target fixated. You don't have auditory exclusion. All your faculties are still with you to address the threat that is in front of you. You know, whether that be by stepping out of the way or hitting them, or, you know, whether you're on the war field, any of those situations. Now, one thing I'll say about those, a lot of people say that's unchivalric or non-chivalric to have a warrior mindset, and you should be striving for courtly grace and courtesy and being chivalric when you're on the war field or the tournament field or whatever. Now, there's two sides to that. You know, in period, you had to go out and kill people as a knight. That was kind of an expected part of the job description, was to lead an army into war and go and do the bidding of your king. You know, there's nothing chivalric about losing a fight you intended to win. If you've done so because you haven't given the fight the respect it deserves. I don't think it's unchivalric to be a warrior. I don't think it's unknightly to have an immediacy of action and step in and end a fight pretty cleanly and swiftly, because, you know, warriors from period to warriors now are expected to be able to do the job that they're employed to do, which is fighting, and then walk off the field and, you know, in a military context, walk into an officer's mess and conduct yourself as a lady or a gentleman. In the SCA context, walk off the war field and go to court and be courtly. So I don't think there's any kind of contradiction in that space. So I think it's so I think it's very important that people, you know, get comfortable with what we're doing, which is having a fight.
Pretty much having a fight. I mean, it's me versus you, and I want to win. I mean, like you said,
right. I want to hit you, and I don't want to let you hit me.
Because it hurts. Unless it's in the helmet most of the time. So
that's right.
I can see that. I can see that.
So, you know, I watch MMA and boxing and things like that, and I try and bring those skills to this combat sport, because, you know, we're having a fight, and, you know, at the end of a UFC match, everyone gives each other a hug and holds up each other's arms that they're the champion, and everyone's mates, because we're all, it was fun, and that was what we all signed up to do. But, you know, at the time that somebody's throwing hammer fists into their face, into the bottom of the octagon, it probably doesn't feel that way, but
probably does not feel so good.
But everyone's courtly and chivalric at the end of it, and everyone's still friends. And I think that's the point. So if we can bring some of our skill sets for violence and energy to this sport, I think that would be great.
Sure. and just be okay with it, because it's going to happen.
And be okay with it, yeah.
Because that's what we're doing. We're performing violent acts towards one another. And I mean, yeah, we wear armor and it protects us a lot of the time, but then, you know, it's a full contact sport. Injuries are, you're going to hurt somebody eventually.
That's right. And accidents happen. And, you know,
yeah.
I had my thumb broken quite badly one day for just a fluke that happened, and you know,
yeah,
that is my cross to bear from SCA
Right. So, all right, perfect. Well, are there any questions before we draw this to a close? People in the Zoom meeting, feel free to turn your cameras on or message me your questions, and I will be happy to ask them. All right. Apparently you made perfect sense and everybody doesn't have any questions.
I'm getting out of this one easily, I think.
Yeah, it looks like it. Let's see, on the Facebook, nothing so far. There's usually about a 10-second delay between what you're saying and what they're listening to. So we'll give them just a few minutes to open up the questions.
I know there's a few people in Lockhart watching, but I dare say they'll pin me down at the next event when we're allowed to have in-person events again and ask me questions then.
Yeah, are you guys under like quarantine too over there while we're waiting?
Yeah, so New Zealand has just gone back to having some in-person activities officially. In Australia, there are still no official events, but in certain locations, based on state rules, there's been a bit of backyard fighter practices, etc. Last weekend here in my state, we managed to get out to a park, about 6 of us, and have a training, and that was great to do. So we're on the way out of our situation here.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I have a couple questions since nobody else is going to ask them. Out of these 5 methods, which one came to you the easiest, and which one was the hardest for you to learn?
So the one that came easiest to me was opponent appreciation or tactics, because that's just the kind of person I am. I look for a solution to a problem, and you know, I go into a fight with the person in front of me being the problem, and I need the solution. So that's the one that kind of came easiest to me because it was innate. The warrior mindset, I guess, was always there, but it required some mundane training and some realization that it came out in me. So that was that. The bit that probably came the hardest for me was the footwork, and that really required that specific training. Helmet goes on, weight goes up onto the balls of the feet to teach myself to do the thing properly with that tool that was my feet.
Okay, got it. That's what I'm struggling with right now is footwork, so I can relate to that. So Melissa Marsh asks, which knights would you call the swordsman in your kingdom?
Whoa, getting me to name names. I usually reference Sir Catan, who is a knight here in my home barony, who I grew up learning to fight. His sword work is impeccable. It is so crisp and clean and fast. It's just phenomenal. So I use him as my reference as to who the swordsman is here in Lockhart.
Okay, got it. And that looks like there are no other questions. So that's kind of lame.
No.
We usually have a lot of questions. I'm sorry. I'm sure they'll be coming up. I didn't get a lot of time to advertise this one like I usually do, just due to work circumstances and stuff like that. So it's probably my fault.
Well, look, I'm sure there's also a lot of people of going, you know, where's Lockhart, for a
What
lot
is
of
this?
people over there. So, you know, and even if they've been able to understand me with my accent, so
Yeah.
we'll see. But they can hit me up on Facebook or whatever.
Ah, see, the more I talk, the more questions come in. Uh, Greg
We're
asks
gonna,
thoughts
yep, go on.
on thoughts on mixing up weapon usage versus dedicated use of one set of tools / weapon combo.
My thoughts on that. So I got really good with sword and shield.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I do, and I consider myself mediocre with everything else. But to be a knight, I believe you need to be competent with every weapon form,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of what that weapon form is. But you don't have to be the best at each of those. I'm a sword and shield fighter. That's what I'll always be. But you put any weapon form in my hand, and I want to be at least competent with it, whether that be, you know, a glaive or, you know, a bar stool in a bar fight.
Fair enough. Be confident in your ability to bring harm to somebody with whatever's sitting next to you.
That's right. By using, you know, your concepts of measure and your concepts of footwork and your warrior mentality and your underlying physical conditioning and fitness, and ability to use your body.
So, yeah, I can see that because I mean the mechanics between each, maybe not necessarily the. No, I'm gonna run with this. The mechanics from like MMA fighting to our fighting are very similar. I mean, you're still, when you throw a punch, you're still throwing your hips into it. When you throw a flat snap, you're throwing. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. Okay.
Power generation, balance, ability to move around, you know, strength, speed, same.
Okay. Alrighty, sir. Well, with that, we're gonna bring this one to a close. I appreciate you coming on here, Jarl Niall. I'm still gonna destroy it. So, you were the first international episode, and we greatly appreciate you taking the time out of your workday to be on the show for us. I know that probably may have been a little bit difficult, but I know I appreciated it, and I know I took a lot from tonight's video. Mostly the footwork stuff I need to work on, and the warrior mentality. It's different than what you usually hear other people talk about, but at the same time, I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people, especially newer fighters. So, other than
Yeah,
that,
be comfortable with your violence. Don't beat yourself up emotionally or philosophically because you're fighting someone. It's literally the sport that we're choosing to do.
exactly. So, do you have anything last to say before we bring this to a close? Maybe a quick tidbit of advice for newer fighters?
Tidbits for newer fighters. It's what Duke Timothy said in your interview with him.
Okay.
It's a buffet. Take what you learn from everyone and piece together your own fighting methodology from the buffet that is available to you. And then I guess my concluding comment, which is what I said earlier, which is if you find yourself in a fair fight, then your tactics suck.
Perfect, man. All righty. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in for tonight's episode of 5 Methods, and we've got a couple more coming up this week. We've got Duke Branos, and then next Tuesday will be the last episode that I will be doing for a while. My baby is being born on the 11th, so next week is Duke Timmer and then my baby, and then we're going to be done for a little while. But again, thank you, sir, for coming on, and we will be in touch, I'm sure. All right.
Thank you.